Good evening, Israel. I realize that as I'm live streaming now, that it is midnight, and it is your worst nightmare. You survived the most ruthless, savage attack on your people and maybe in human history. I don't think there's ever been an assault that was as brutal as what Muslims perpetrated on the kibbutzim and in the rave on 10/7 of 23. And then you had the Iranian regime that partnered with Qatar, another Islamic regime, to fund the Islamic terrorists out of Gaza that were responsible for mutilating children, raping women, abducting grandparents, mass murdering children and men. And they were in the midst of building a nuclear bomb. I've done the very comprehensive analysis of where they were in all of this. And my understanding and considering all viewpoints was that they had reached 90% fissile purity on enough uranium to build 15 bombs of standard design. And with the tritium factory that they had, they could increase the yield such that with the uranium that they possessed at that high yield, they would be able to build 30 bombs. You really had no choice but to take them out. But consider the consequence. I have spent my last hour looking at the videos posted on X out of Israel. It really is a phenomenal thing that we have available to us. You can go out with your smartphone and look at the sky, and I can see it with you. And I feel like I am there with you. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these videos shot all around and in Israel. And each of them shows anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 incoming missiles. Many of them not intercepted. I'm so sorry, Israel. It must be horrendous knowing that for thousands of years you have been singled out to be attacked in this way. And now, as we live in 2025, you are being besieged by three groups of people simultaneously. This has never happened before. You've got 2 billion Muslims with a God that brags about terrorizing and murdering Jews, plundering them, kidnapping them, enslaving them, who slanders and demeans, dehumanizes Jews and calls them apes and pigs. This is the Islamic wannabe God, Allah. Fortunately, he is no more God than Satan. But he and Muhammad perpetrated genocide on every Jew in Arabia. Muhammad himself participating, raped Jewish women, tortured Jewish men, decapitated them, sold all of the children into slavery to buy more weapons. What you're witnessing over your head tonight needs to be understood in that context. You're being attacked by Islam. what's happening to you, the reason that the Islamic Republic decided to build nuclear bombs and constantly screamed death to Israel is because of the Quran, the Hadith of Muhammad, and their grotesque anti-Semitism. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I give every book I have ever written, including the 5 that are part of this series, away for free. This is a goddamn religion. You can see from the size of it, it's 825 pages. This happens to be volume 5, meaning there's 4,200 pages. Everything in this book is based upon the Quran and the Hadith, the Islamic scriptures. I explain who Allah is, who Muhammad was, what the Quran actually says by reordering it chronologically. The Quran, you may not know, is a jumbled mess. The shortest surahs to longest surahs, basically. Actually, the other way around, longest surahs to shortest surahs, which puts the last revealed towards the front and the first revealed towards the back, but it's not even like that. It's a jumbled mess. It's like a hurricane going over a junkyard. And impossible to understand under that basis because it's so repetitive and so out of context and so jumbled chronologically. And Allah is such a poor writer, such a poor communicator, that I did something in writing these 5 volumes that heretofore had never been done. I reordered the Quran chronologically, and I set it into the context of Muhammad's life as it was revealed in the Torah, the history of Al-Tabari, and the life of Muhammad, the biography, compiled by Ibn Ishaq, and then added additional insights and flavors from Bukhari and his Hadith collections. Never been done before. The result is the most comprehensive, chronological, contextual, and best documented presentation of Islam ever written. It excoriates the religion. It proves that Allah was no more God than a garden snake. It demonstrates that Muhammad was the worst man that ever lived. He was indeed a pedophile. He was a rapist. He was a genocidal maniac, an armed robber, a thief, mass murderer. He was a pervert by any standard. He was literally the worst man who ever lived. The Quran is the worst book ever written. The saddest thing about the Quran, Israel, is something that I'm going to tell you next because you need to know it as these missiles and rockets and drones fly above your head because they are all sent your way for a single reason: Islam. Without Islam, they're not there. They go all the way. Muhammad was a garden variety thug. He was a horrible human being. He was illiterate. He was stupid. I mean, he was literally dumb as a stone. And he was an absolute pervert. Just horrible leader of men. He had no courage. He had no character. He had no intelligence. He had nothing going for him. And first 12 years of Islam, he had no followers either. He was laughed out of town because of the stupidity of the night's journey. That is the reason that there are those 2 hideous scars on top of the Temple Mount, where you imagine that he flew a winged donkey to Jerusalem, a city he didn't even know the name of, to meet in the temple that he did not know had been destroyed by the Romans 600 years earlier, to meet with Jews that were long dead, so he could go to heaven by way of hell. It is the most ludicrous story in the world, but it was his only way of getting out of of Dodge out of Cobbaville, because he, just the week before, he'd come up with the satanic verses, where he said that all of Allah's messengers speak on behalf of Satan. There's actually surahs on the Quran that are dedicated to Satan and to demons. No secret that the Quran is a satanic book. So how, under these circumstances, Muhammad's a coward, he's a pedophile, he's a rapist, he's a thief, he's a liar, he's illiterate, he's stupid as a stone. How in the world does such a man, and he, by the way, he's not a prophet, he didn't get a single prophecy right, not one. And Allah's no more God than, as I said, a run-of-the-mill garden snake, although he's a bit more toxic. So how did someone like that come up with a book like the Quran? Why was I able to write 5 volumes like this on what we have as the legacy from an illiterate man? Not going to like what I have to tell you as you see those rockets soar over your heads. Rabbis in Yathrib tried to make a buck by selling Talmud stories to Muhammad. They recited to him from their Talmud, which then Muhammad claimed came from Allah, and he gave the Quran a veil of religiosity. Had rabbis not tried to make a buck to sell Muhammad Talmud readings that created this myth that the Quran was inspired by his God, you would never have heard his name. No one would ever have screamed Allahu Akbar. The Jews of Arabia would not have faced genocide. There would have been no 1948 war, no 1967, no 1973, no intifadas, no 10/7 of 23. It all occurred because rabbis made the Quran seem religious by selling Muhammad Talmud stories. But it got worse. Rabbis are arrogant. And when Muhammad claimed that the stories that they had sold him, which he brought wholesale into the Quran, came from his God, they laughed at him. They mocked him. What happens when you mock a psychopath? I said Muhammad was a pervert. I said he was stupid. I said that he was a coward. But he's still a psychopath. Well, psychopaths don't much like being mocked. Look what happens when you criticize Donald Trump. He slaughtered them. Cut off every man's head, raped every woman, sold every child into slavery to buy more weapons. That's what he did. And then he pursued them again in Kabar. Kabar is a exact replica of what happened on 10/7. The events of Kabar and the events of 10/7 are identical. Oh yeah, the Muslims had upgraded from swords and daggers to AK-47s and some RPGs, but other than that, same thing. That's why those missiles are flying over your head. This is the antidote. You can find these books, and every single one of them is free in its entirety. I wrote them because the God whose name you erased asked me to do this as a favor to him and to you. They're free at goddamnreligion.org. They're also free at YADAYAH.com. Please read them. Know your enemy. Defend yourself and those you love. Protect Israel. I do want to say one more thing before we go into our scheduled program for today on Chakmah Choter. On the morning of 10/7, I wrote a letter to Israel. You might say, who am I to write a letter to Israel? I'm sitting here in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. I'm a goy. Why would I write a letter to Israel? Well, I guess you can begin by saying that I have spent the last 24 years of my life, every waking moment, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, over 100,000 hours devoted to awakening Yisrael, so that Jews become Yehudim again, so that you embrace Yahowah's name, so that you recognize your Messiah, the Son of God, your Savior, your former and returning King, Dod. I have a lot of skin in the game, Israel. I've earned the right to write you a letter. Right after 9/11. Yahowah approached me and said, I want you to do this for me. We had a little discussion. He demonstrated that he was who he claimed to be. I was an agnostic at the time. That was the end of my agnosticy. I pretty quickly recognized that God exists. We became very close and we worked together hand in hand for now 24 years. And he asked me to begin with Islam. I met with Al-Qaeda. I met with Hamas. I met with Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. And I learned why they hate Jews. And when I came back, I wrote a book called Tea with Terrorists. It speaks of my meeting with Hamas and Hezbollah. But I then began a work on a book called Prophet of Doom. You may have heard of it. And Prophet of Doom is the forerunner of Goddamn Religion. It was one volume. And I wrote it right after 9/11 to help awaken Americans to the threat of Islam. Those were Islamic suicide bombings. And in the ensuing years, after doing 5,000 radio interviews, telling everyone who would listen that Islam was the enemy, that it had to be quarantined. If you didn't quarantine Islam, the plague would wipe out much of humanity. And I spoke specifically of how to deal with Islam. I had a 3-point plan. That 3-point plan would have worked beautifully. And no one has ever worked harder at communicating that than I did. Unfortunately, you know who was the least receptive? Israel. It's funny in a way. You know who is the most receptive? The highest per capita readership in the world for Prophet of Doom. Look up to the sky. Iran. When I wrote Prophet of Doom, 90% of Iranians, closer to 95, identified themselves as Muslims. A year ago, it was down to 35% of Iranians that identify themselves as Muslims. For years, one of the most popular books, the online version and the version that I provided orally, where I provided the entire book as a narrative audiobook, was in Iran to a large degree. They're free of Islam and would like to throw off the ayatollahs that Jimmy Carter brought upon the nation by having read the precursor to this. And the difference between Goddamn Religion, the 5 volumes, and Prophet of Doom is that every word of the Quran is presented. Every pertinent hadith is presented. The analysis is comprehensive. I disprove the religion of Islam, the Quran, Allah, Muhammad, the Hadith, the Sunnah, thousands and thousands of times over. And the truth is really important in this case, particularly for Israel. Now, as a result of that, I received many thousands of death threats. I even got a fatwa from Saudi Arabia. So, Israel, I have some skin in the game. I also spent the last 20 years after that experience translating the Dead Sea Scrolls. I could then focus on what the words actually said, scrubbed of the diacritical markings of the Masoretes, validating the text to the oldest manuscripts, and bringing the meaning of the words back to their original meaning when it was written 3,450 years ago. And as a result, I wrote 35 books in total, but 25 of them are on my translations of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. This one happens to be volume 5 of a series called Yada Yahowah, Katsir Harvest, about the upcoming harvest. That is your life insurance policy. This book will explain your enemy. This one will reintroduce you to your God. So that's why I'm here. Now, it had a little more to it than what I just sat down to write you an open letter to Israel, to my beloved Jews, on 10/7 of 23. Because I knew your future. And I knew what you were going to do, and I knew what the consequence was going to be. But there's more to it than that, and I'll share in a moment what my recommendations were. But Israel, are you familiar with a person called the Nakar and Nakri? You know what the word means? Do you know who used it? Let me give you a little hint. When the home for Yahweh's name was first dedicated, Solomon, considered the brightest man in the world. I don't think he was 10% as bright as his father, but that was his handle anyway. In the dedication of the house for Yahweh's name, the real Sermon on the Mount, on top of the mount, he told all Israel that there would be a Nakri, an observant foreigner, who would serve as a Zeroah, one cultivating the harvest. This book I just showed you, Katsir, that's the 2 harvests. We're dealing with Shabat, 22nd of May, 2026, and Towrah, 23 and 24, September 2033. He said that this man would speak to you coming out of the sky via the satellites. And he said, you need to listen to everything he has to say and then act upon it. The other person to write about the Nakar is Isaiah. You'll find that reference throughout the great Isaiah scroll. Now, Israel, let me ask you another question. Have you ever heard of an individual known as the Choter? You're familiar with Dode, of course, David. He wrote the books that are attributed to Solomon, called the Proverbs. They're Mashal. It was Dode that wrote them, not Solomon. And he dedicated the 14th to the Choter. It's 35 statements long, all written regarding one man in his distant future, some almost 3,000 years from him. And he referred to this individual as extraordinarily intelligent, that he would be empowered by God, and that he would serve as his herald, heralding his return. And I mentioned Isaiah. So Dode wrote the 14th Mashal, about the entirety of it, about the Choter. The Choter is also featured in the 11th chapter of Isaiah. So why am I bringing this up to you? There's an entire chapter of Isaiah devoted to the Choter. He's your last end times witness. He's the one who writes the books that become the very sign that God lifts up to bring you home. Do you know what God said about this individual? He said that he would have the 7 spirits of Yahowah, the very spirit of Yahowah, but also the spirit of Chakmah, intelligence, the spirit of Bien, understanding, of Etzah, being able to be the first to understand God's story from beginning to end, as well as everything in between. Well, I'm the first person to know that there was no Jesus Christ, that myth that has tormented God's people for so long was made up in 52 CE by Paul. And it's all based on counterfeiting the real Messiah, who told you that he would be crucified on Passover in 33 CE. He even gave you the very day that it would occur, 700 years in advance, told you he'd be crucified to fulfill Passover 1,000 years in advance. He is the real Messiah. God calls him the Messiah 3 different times. God calls him the Son of God, his Son, 3 different times. God tells us he is returning as brilliant as the sun, alongside God's presence. When God returns, he says that he'll be accompanied by the one whom you pierced. And you're going to cry for him as the firstborn. The first person to determine and prove that it was Dode who was crucified, 33 CE, and that not a single rabbi recognized him, even though the prophecies regarding what he did are prolific and they're obvious. The most important discovery in the history of Israel. Nothing is more valuable to you than knowing that. And I'm the same guy that introduced Yahowah's name to you again. Are you familiar, Israel, that there's 3 men that Yahowah refers to as Zeroah? One is Moshe. David is the second. The Choter and Nachri. Named Yada, one who knows, is the third. And the word has so many meanings, from sacrificial lamb, which fits Dode perfectly since he fulfilled Passover, to it's based on Zerah, which means that my job is to cultivate the seeds that have been sown to produce a productive harvest. Israel, you're aware that Eliah is coming back, aren't you? Do you know who the other witness is? You know there's 2. He's Yada. Do you know there are more prophecies pertaining to what I'm sharing with you now, Israel, than anyone else other than Dode? Are you familiar, Israel, with the Adamah Parah? Do you know what that means? I'll translate it. It's the bloody red man of the earth who is productive and fruitful. It's often rendered as the red heifer. Just as the fulfillment of Passover was not accomplished by a little hammy, but the corporeal body of the Messiah and Son of God died in the second of 3 lives. That red heifer, don't be looking for red cows. He's me. 24 September, a Shabat, to the backdrop of a full solar eclipse on top of the Temple Mount, cleansed of the Islamic scars, with a replica of the tent of the witness fluttering in the breeze. I'm going to be bludgeoned to death with the corporeal manifestation. Satan, just as Dowd was bludgeoned by the beast of Rome. As the Adam of Perah. And you know who's going to officiate at the ceremony regarding this sacrifice? Yah. What's Yah's proclivity? He is the most effective spokesperson that God ever deployed against religion and politics. Yahweh himself is going to ignite the flames, going to release torrents of water that are going to dance off the Temple Mount, and this ash from my sacrifice, the torrents of cleansing waters and the purging flames are going to purify a remnant of Yisrael. Those of you who survive the time of Yaakov's troubles and are gathered unto Jerusalem, it will cleanse you so that you're prepared to be betrothed as the adulterous woman, now beautiful. Numbers 19, resolving Numbers 5. In anticipation of Dowd's return as the Messiah and the King. 10 days later. Israel, have you paid any attention to a man that Isaiah, we can look this up in the Dead Sea Scrolls too, turn to what you now call the 63rd chapter. Who's there? What does he say? Do you know? He speaks of a man, one who comes out from Edom. Edom, Jacob's brother. And what does he say about him? He says he's bloody red. Why? Because he's been treading in the wine vat, and because he's going to be bludgeoned. And what does Isaiah say about him? That he is going to save many. That's why I've written all these books and offered them to you free. Israel, with those rockets and missiles, drones flying above your head. I have become the first and only person to explain to you why they're there and what you can do to stop them. But I didn't stop there. I'm the first ever to translate the Dead Sea Scrolls, correct the Masoretic text, so that you might know Israel. Yahweh again. That you would bring him back into your life. That you would come to know your beloved King, Savior, the Messiah, the very Son of God, the prophet, the shepherd, Dowd David, and capitalize on these harvests, Shabuah and Towrah. On the morning of October 7th, a year and a half ago, I did the same thing that I did before coming down and sitting down in this chair and looking into this camera this evening. I watched as Muslims fled and scampered in, ran, most of them on foot, into Israel screaming Allahu Akbar, and I knew what was going to happen. There'd be so many Jews raped, mutilated, abducted, and murdered. Because you see, Israel, there's no one that knew Islam better. I know that religion better than anyone, maybe who's ever lived. And I knew that the best hope for Israel at that moment was Prophet of Doom, but I was embarrassed. If I were to show you this book on harvest in its infancy, rather than being one 825-page book, this book was just one book, and it incorporated Pesach, Matzah, Bakodim, Shavua, Towrah, and Kippurim and Sukkah into the same volume. And it was about 500 pages, and it had all 7 Moed Mikre. And now it's 3 volumes, all much larger than the original. And this is because every book I have written, I've augmented as I've learned more. Except Prophet of Doom. Selfishly writing Prophet of Doom was the most amazing, horrible experience of my life. Muhammad is reprehensible. Allah's Satan. The first Muslims were reprehensible. They were genocidal. Islam is about perpetrating apartheid. Writing it, becoming so familiar with Islam, and then doing thousands of talk radio interviews on it. It was not a lot of fun. Like wallowing in hell. It was also amazing, though, to see all of the death threats that were brought against me, and how YAHOWAH honored his promise to protect me. And how, in doing 5,000 talk radio interviews, television programs, most of which had callers that could call in and ask any question. And in all that time, I was never stumped. I always had the answer. I knew the religion, understood the religion better than anyone, including Muslims, including the best, most well-trained imams. And so it was amazing to see what YAHOWAH did. He honored his promises. So on the morning of 10/7, which is, I think, even less horrific than what you're witnessing now, because even though the Muslims were more personally savage on that day, and the IDF let you down so tragically on that day, it was a very small part of Israel that was susceptible. Now these rockets are raining down on the whole nation, and missiles. So I recall seeing that, and I immediately turned to YAHOWAH and said, YAHOWAH, I really don't want to have to rewrite Prophet of Doom. I just felt the sense that I needed to do it, and I didn't want to do it. And God he's always the same way with me. He said, young man, I've taken care of you. Now you take care of my people. I spent the next 6-9 months of my life doing the best job that I think's ever been done on exposing and condemning the religion that wants to annihilate Jews. Don't do as you did the last time and ignore it. It's a gift to you, one offered by your God. Read it, for crying out loud. Know that your enemy is not Hamas. It's not Hezbollah. It isn't even Iran. It's not the Houthis. It's Islam. You could fight. You're not going to get the opportunity, but you could fight for another 10 years in Gaza, and you couldn't eradicate Hamas. They are Islam. Gaza is Islam. You just need to know who your enemy is so that you can fight them appropriately. On the morning of 10/7, I offered Israel this plan, and it's a letter that you can read if you go to goddamnreligion.org or you go to yadayah.com and you open volume 1, or even go to the site's resources. You're going to find this open letter called War with Religion, at War with Religion. And the first thing it says that you've got to know your enemy. You've got to read the material that I have documented and provided for you. If you don't know your enemy, if you're going to lash out at symptoms, you have no chance of success. You're going to make a bad situation worse, which is what you did in Gaza. By continuing to pummel Gaza, I understand they had it coming. But to go after Gaza and pursue an unwinnable war against a tactic, you turned the world against you, committed suicide. So I said the first thing you need to do is know who your enemy is, capitalize on what I was doing here in rewriting Prophet of Doom as Yada Yahowah, as goddamn religion. The second thing is that, and I just can't get this through Jewish minds, you have to stop using Palestine and Palestinian unless it is to mock the term. Palestine was created as a racial slur by Hadrian, who was perpetrating genocide against Jews, crucifying hundreds of thousands. And he was an arrogant asshole, sadistic, another psychopath. And he wanted to victim shame, like Muslims do today, like Marxists do to Jews today, wanted to victim shame. And he did that by dusting off the old moniker that was found in the writings about the Philistines, and he renamed Judea Philistia. The name would have been forgotten if it wasn't for the fact that the English are anti-Semites. And they preferred to use that name because they just don't like Jews. It's a good slur. Nice anti-Semitic genocidal slur. And the British thought they were superior to you. So they prolonged the name. And then the Marxists from the KGB and the Muslims from the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1960s, after having lost the War of Independence and the Six-Day War, decided to use that old Roman moniker, that slur, to degrade Jews. They would call Muslims Palestinians. There was no such thing as a Palestinian. But they would use the term as a genocidal slur to perpetrate apartheid and genocide against Jews. And that was its sole purpose. And so for you to use the term, for you to have a politician, a newspaper, a television station that has the audacity to use that godforsaken genocidal slur, and if you're one of those who uses it, you have brought great shame upon yourselves. Because the combination of the suicidal response that you have in Gaza, which I said specifically, if you invade Gaza, you'll make a bad situation worse. You'll end up manufacturing more Islamic jihadists than the IDF can kill. And that's exactly what's happened. The combination of that, the images of destroyed Gaza and the false claims of baby killers have become so pervasive and so shrill, all wrapped into this stupid racial slur of free Palestine, such that the world's going to capitulate. We're going to have a Neville Chamberlain moment. That's what I wrote to you almost 2 years ago. You're going to have a Neville Chamberlain moment. And your Neville Chamberlain is Donald Trump. And his Czechoslovakia is Israel. And his Hitler is MBS, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. And his Nazis are Muslims. And his outcome, World War III. millions of Jews are going to die. And all of this is going to transpire between now and May 22nd, less than a year from now, of 2026, because the prophets told us it would occur just like this. So I begged you, Israel, not to trust the United States. And then when he was elected, to distrust Donald Trump and give you every reason to do so. That's what's going to happen, and it'll happen soon. And the concern over that is that you'll be given promises of security by a country that has never protected Israel and will not going forward. And you're going to be put into the hands of the Saudi Arabians, the birthplace of the genocidal religion that has perpetrated mass murder against Jews. You know what Muslims did in the first 100 years of Islam? They murdered 200 million people. 200 million. It's a third of the Earth's population at the time. And you're going to trust them with your security. Prophets say that you'll be thinned at the waist, become indefensible. And they write specifically of the fact that there's going to be a much greater version of 10:7 that will occur in 2027. And it'll be between 500 and 1,000 times worse. And trying to minimize the carnage and to encourage as many as will listen to capitalize on the Shabat and the Towrah harvest so that you're not caught up in that carnage is why I wrote to you on that day. That's why I'm speaking to you today. So the first point I wanted to make in that open letter is that you need to know your enemy. Your enemy is Islam, not Hamas, not the PLO, not Hezbollah, not Iran. They're just symptoms. The real problem is Islam, and you need to know it, and need to know that you don't defeat a religious foe with bullets and bombs. Your average IQ is 115. The average IQ of the Muslims wanting to kill you is in the 70s. In Gaza, it's in the 60s. You need to use your brains as opposed to your bombs, and you can defeat this foe. The second is you have to stop using Palestine and Palestinian. You cannot play into their hands. They are malcontent, murderous Muslims. Call them what they are. Deal with them that way. The third thing I said is that there's only one way that you have any shot of getting the hostages back without committing suicide. And that is that I would have traded Alaska Mosque and the Dome of the Rock for the hostages. They would have said no on the first, and you can take your pick. I would have taken down the Dome of the Rock first, just because it's such an unsightly boil. And then if they said no on the returning the hostages, all of them, not some of them, I'd taken down Alaska Mosque. What did they call that raid on 10/7? Perhaps you remember.
Alaska flood.
Ah, that's it. Alaska flood. If you didn't get the hostages back, then at least tear down that mosque, the one responsible for them being taken. The next thing I told Israel on that day, and it, unfortunately, you already lost. If you don't win the war of world opinion, public opinion, then it doesn't matter what you do on the battlefield. Your days are numbered. And you just didn't lose it. You got creamed. And if you look now on X and Facebook and YouTube and the like, the mainstream media, Main Street, across the world, you lost the war of public opinion 100 to 1. And it's largely because you didn't do as I had said. And I feel badly having to tell you I told you so, but I told you so. And because so much has been lost because you didn't listen, you need to know that I told you so. But what you needed to do on that day and every day since is to show every stolen life. Autopsies, pictures, the beauty of that life before it was stolen. And then the story of how each individual life was taken. And all of the pictures, raw, uncut, unmasked. And the whole story, every single life documented. You know, might not fit Jewish sensibilities. But I'm here to tell you, their lives matter at that point. And that's the story you needed to tell, but you didn't. I begged Israel to use words wisely against this enemy, to expose and condemn it for the horror that it is, because Islam is so easy to disprove. If you had an entire nation working to disprove the religion because you're equipped with this kind of information, you wouldn't have gone into Gaza to make a bad situation worse. You wouldn't have turned the world against you under those circumstances. The next thing that Israel had to do, and the most important of all, stop erasing Yahweh's name. You post, Hashem is with us, or G-D will protect us, or we beg for your prayers, God will listen. No, he isn't. I've read the prophets. God said explicitly, I'm going to sit this one out. My people have rejected me. They've erased my name. They've renounced the fact that my son is their Messiah. Go to David. Read the 89th Mizmor. Go to this website. Read the 3 volumes of Coming Home. About what was written about Dode, what Dode wrote. Take it to heart. Read an introduction to God. Read the chapter, Why Me, Why You? To survive this, Israel, you need to return to Yahweh. When you return to Yahweh, he will return to you. You want a source of protection that's infinitely better than the Iron Dome because no one could even shoot at you? Look at me. I have received thousands of death threats. No one has taken a shot. I have been in front of huge crowds where tens of thousands of people and syndicated radio stations worldwide where they wanted to evacuate the auditorium because of the death threats. And I stood right there and said, I'm not moving. Broadcast away, we'll hold this debate. Why? Because I value Yahweh's name. Because I love him. And if you were to do the same, there'd be no missiles in the sky. And rather than enduring the time of Yaakov's troubles that is very quickly approaching, it starts on Shavuot, May 22nd, 2026. You'd be safe from it. You and your family and your loved ones. So that's what you need to do. That's what you needed to have done. And that is your future. That is what's going to happen if you don't do it. 2 out of 3 Jews are going to die. You start the time of Yaakov's troubles just about a year from now. Messiah returns 8 years from now. His name is Dod. He's coming back with Yahweh. And there will be 4 more Moed Mikre to be fulfilled. Shavuot Teruah, Kapurim, and Sukkah. And God's plan is to restore the earth back to the conditions found in Eden. And he wants you to be part of that remnant that we'll get to celebrate it and camp out with him forevermore. All right. Be safe as these missiles fall. I was going to continue the series on Chakmah Choter, but I think we'll probably have to hold that off for another program. It's hard for me to think about anything other than your safety now. My love for you, Yahweh's love for you, Dod's desire to protect you. But for all that to occur, you've got to listen to us. Please, Israel, listen.